All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that's honestly both fascinating and incredibly frustrating: the stark contrast between the high ideals of Kenya's constitution and the actual reality of elected leadership. Think about it. When a nation writes a constitution, it's essentially signing a massive binding contract with its citizens about exactly how things are going to be run. But, well, what happens when that contract gets ignored? So, we're going to unpack exactly what the law actually demands of its leaders and why there's this massive, persistent gap between those lofty expectations and the gritty reality of everyday politics. Let's just kick things right off with the elephant in the room. How on earth do individuals facing serious, documented corruption allegations continue to win elections and hold on to power? I mean, we all read the headlines, right? We hear about these explosive scandals, yet the ballot box often tells a completely different story. Voters routinely elect the exact same people accused of raiding public coffers. So you gotta ask yourself, is this a catastrophic failure of the legal system, a loophole in the law, or is it something else entirely? And to really understand why this matters, we have to look at everyday life. High taxes, poor roads, failing hospitals. Every single time you complain about these daily frustrations, you are actually feeling the direct, painful impact of leadership decisions and missing public funds. When development money just mysteriously vanishes, it's not some abstract, high-level political issue just debated in fancy boardrooms. No, it's a constitutional violation that you feel personally. You feel it on your daily commute, in the waiting room of a clinic, and literally right inside your wallet. The consequences of corruption aren't invisible. They are the actual potholes you swerve to avoid every day. Which brings us to Section 1, the Chapter 6 Blueprint. So, to solve these exact everyday problems, the Kenyan Constitution actually contains a very specific, robust blueprint. It's Chapter 6, dealing with leadership and integrity. This chapter was designed to be an absolutely uncompromising, airtight job description for state officers. And Article 73, that's the foundation of the whole thing. It explicitly states, authority assigned to a state officer is a public trust. That is a remarkably powerful phrase. The Constitution makes it abundantly clear that leadership is not about grabbing personal power or dishing out favors. It's supposed to be a sacred trust, a strict mandate that demands deep respect for the people. Okay, let's break down that legal jargon so it's crystal clear. Public trust simply means the responsibility to serve the people, rather than the power to rule over them. It requires a complete 180 shift in perspective from how politics is usually played. A leader's actual, legally mandated job is selfless service. It means putting citizens first, genuinely listening to their needs, and acting relentlessly in their best interest, instead of treating public office like some personal fiefdom where citizens are just treated as subjects. This creates a really stark contrast in expectations. On one hand, the Constitution demands a strict public duty. That means serving citizens honestly, making objective decisions based solely on the public interest, with no fear or favor. But let's be honest, this constitutional requirement was deliberately written to combat a very unfortunate, very common reality: personal gain. We're talking about the rampant practice of awarding lucrative government tenders to close friends, blatant nepotism, and basically misusing public money to build up personal networks instead of basing decisions on actual merit and public need. So, the crucial point you have to take away from this is integrity is not optional. We aren't just talking about polite suggestions or, nice to have moral guidelines. The law outlined in Chapter 6 is incredibly strict and legally binding. It demands absolute honesty, objective decision-making, and the mandatory declaration of any personal interest that might conflict with public duties. Transparency and accountability are mandatory, absolute baseline requirements for holding any office in the land. Let's look a bit closer at Article 76, which deals directly with financial probity. Here we see ironclad rules meticulously designed to stop leaders from using their office to quietly amass wealth. Think about it. If a state officer receives a lavish gift on an official occasion, it belongs entirely to the republic, not the individual. Maintaining unauthorized bank accounts outside Kenya to hide assets, expressly forbidden. Seeking or accepting personal loans that compromise their integrity, absolutely prohibited. The Constitution actively tries to cut off all those traditional avenues for illicit enrichment. 0. That is the exact number of dual citizenships allowed for state officers or members of the defense forces under Article 78. Now, sure, there are a very limited number of exceptions, like for judges or individuals who literally can't legally opt out of another citizenship because of that country's laws. But for the vast majority of leaders representing the public, this stringent rule stands firm. It really just proves how demanding the allegiance and loyalty rules are. Your loyalty to the nation has to be completely undivided. And get this, the strictness even extends to life after holding office. Under Article 77(2) is the absolute maximum number of concurrent remunerative positions a retired state officer on a public pension can hold as a chairperson, director, or employee in state-owned companies. Again, the overarching goal of the Constitution right here is to prevent the endless hoarding of public resources by a select few, making sure the entire system remains fair, balanced, and accessible to everyone. Moving on to Section 2, the accountability mandate. Because let's face it, what happens when a leader actually violates these strict guidelines and demeans their office? All these rules are totally meaningless without enforcement, right? Well, Articles 75 and 79 outline a very clear step-by-step disciplinary progression. First, an allegation of misconduct is officially made. Second, this triggers an investigation spearheaded by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, which is an independent body Parliament is legally required to establish just for this. Third, a formal disciplinary procedure takes place. And fourth, if they're found guilty, it leads to swift dismissal. And here is the truly crucial part. The Constitution ensures that absolutely no one is above the law. Violators who get dismissed are permanently disqualified from holding any future state office. Done. Which brings us to Section 3, the constitutional disconnect. Now, here is the twist that makes this whole explainer so crucial. We've seen the blueprint, we've examined the rules, and we totally understand the strict penalties demanded by the law. But then we face reality. Despite airtight laws and firmly established investigative procedures, leaders with serious, well-documented allegations of missing funds still somehow secure massive election victories. They bypass the strict integrity tests, they overcome the threat of swift disqualification, and they still end up sitting in the highest seats of power. And the crazy thing is, it's not like the tools don't exist. The mechanisms to force accountability are all there, and they're actively functioning. I mean, we have regular, highly detailed public audits exposing exactly where missing funds went. We have active, high-profile court cases. We have official, ongoing investigations. But these systemic, legal mechanisms become entirely meaningless if the final and honestly most powerful hurdle in the entire democratic process, the ballot box, just completely ignores them. And that brings us to a really tough, deeply uncomfortable realization. Is the system failing, or are citizens just ignoring these standards? We have to face the fact that a constitution at the end of the day is just a document. It's just ink on paper. It's a living thing only if the voters themselves breathe life into it by enforcing its standards at the polling station. The law, the courts, the commissions, they can only do so much to vet a candidate. Ultimately, the system requires the active, principled participation of the electorate to actually give it teeth. Simply put, if the voters don't care about Chapter 6, the politicians certainly won't. We absolutely cannot separate our daily, personal struggles from the people we deliberately put in charge. When integrity is ignored at the very top echelons of leadership, those ripple effects are felt literally everywhere. Remember the beginning of our explainer? Ignoring these critical mandates directly and predictably impacts your costs of living, your ability to find a good job, the quality of healthcare your family receives, and the safety of the very roads you drive on every single day. The connection is direct and it is undeniable. So, I want to leave you with this final kind of provocative thought to really reflect on before the next election cycle begins. When you stand at the ballot box, completely alone with your choice, do you prioritize the strict integrity demanded by Chapter 6, or do you prioritize something else? Because ultimately, the true power to enforce the Constitution doesn't just lie with the Supreme Court judges or the anti-corruption commissions. The ultimate responsibility and the ultimate power lies entirely in your hands. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.